1st July 1943. Kursk salient, central Russia. Dawn settles heavy mist across wheat fields near Prokhorovka, dew collecting on telephone lines stretching toward Orel and Belgorod. Soviet and German forward observation posts note limited patrol movement. War diaries from both fronts confirm an unusual quiet. Decoded German wireless traffic, intercepted by Soviet 5th Directorate, reveals concentration orders for Panzergrenadier and Schwer Panzerabteilung units. At the same time, Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographs record newly sighted Soviet trench systems in multiple belts, a scale not yet seen on the Eastern Front. Rail records from Bryansk Front headquarters show 900 outbound supply trains in June alone, documented by Soviet GKO logistics reports. Humidity hangs thick, soil compact after spring rains receded. Engineers measure ground-bearing pressure favorable for armor. A Soviet infantry sergeant, Ivan Denisov of the 52nd Guards Rifle Division, writes in his notebook that men sleep in boots, recorded in the Central Archives of the Ministry of Defense. For staff officers, it became the earliest sign that the front was shifting. Come April 1943, Wehrmacht High Command, Zossen, Germany. Snow recedes from the Oboyan sector as staff officers review maps under electric lamps. German OKH files confirm Adolf Hitler approves Operation Citadel on 15th April, ordering a double envelopment of the Kursk salient. The objective: encircle Soviet Central and Voronezh fronts, destroy reserve formations, and restore initiative lost at Stalingrad. Planners estimate deployment of 2,700 tanks and assault guns from 9th Army in the north and 4th Panzer Army in the south. Rail schedules allocate 150 transport trains for heavy equipment movement through May and June. Maintenance logs note arrival of Panther AUSF, D tanks to XV-8 Panzer Corps, 50 operational by late June, with chronic engine fire reports already filed. A staff memorandum dated 20th April records concern over delay. Every week benefits Soviet defensive preparation. Fuel allocation reaches 1,800 cubic meters per day for armored units. Luftflotte 6 commits 1-800 aircraft to air support, logged in operational strength returns. In the same week, a Gefreiter named Karl-Heinz Müller, signals clerk in the communications section, writes to his wife about the sound of teleprinters, paper dust and ringing ears from dawn to midnight. His letter, donated to Bundesarchiv by his family in 1982, captures the mechanical hum beneath strategic ambition. For German command, the operation represented calculated risk, momentum regained through concentrated armoured thrust. 12th April 1943, Moscow, Soviet Stavka headquarters. Soviet intelligence networks, augmented by decoded signals from Bletchley Park's ultra-intercepts, confirm German offensive intentions against the Kursk salient. Stavka Directive No. 343, issued this date and preserved in military archives, orders construction of fortified defensive belts on the salient's northern and southern shoulders. Central Front under General Konstantin Rokossovsky and Voronezh Front under General Nikolai Vatutin receive priority engineer allocation. Planning documents specify 3 defensive lines: main belt, second belt, and reserve belt, total depth reaching 190 kilometers in key sectors. Mine barrier density is calculated at 5,000 anti-tank and anti-personnel mines per kilometer of front in critical zones, recorded in engineer brigade reports. Soviet tank strength reaches 3,400 operational vehicles by early July, with additional reserves concentrated in steppe front under General Ivan Konev. 500 tanks held as operational reserve, per GKO logistics summaries. Rail transport intensifies. June manifests show 1,900 supply trains moving through Bryansk front corridors, carrying ammunition, rations, fuel, and replacement equipment. A Soviet sapper, Lieutenant Mikhail Yegorov of the 5th Engineer Battalion, writes in his post-war deposition about the work, "Hammer blows from digging tools, shocking arms to numbness, blistered palms, 600 grams black bread per day." He describes one worker collapsing from heat exhaustion in early June, documented in divisional health records. For Soviet command, the defensive preparation represented calculated response. Absorb German momentum, then counterattack. 11th June 1943. Luftwaffe Reconnaissance Wing, Kharkov Airfield, Ukraine. Aerial photography missions over the Kursk salient return images that alter German estimates. Luftflotte 6 sortie logs confirm 340 reconnaissance flights in June, documenting Soviet defensive works. Analysts note trench systems in multiple layers, anti-tank ditches measuring up to 4 meters wide, and artillery positions dug into reverse slopes. A photo interpreter's marginal note on reconnaissance print 44071A, preserved in Bundesarchiv, reads, "Density exceeds all previous sectors. Intelligence summaries estimate Soviet tank strength at 2,800 vehicles, underestimating actual deployment by 600 units. German field police reports from Army Group Center note unusual partisan activity disrupting rail lines south of Orel. 72 sabotage incidents in June, delaying supply transport by cumulative 140 hours, recorded in security logs. At the same time, Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army, under General Pavel Rotmistrov, moves covertly toward reserve positions south of Kursk. Railway manifests confirm over 800 railcar movements in 5 nights, using blacked-out schedules to avoid Luftwaffe detection. A Soviet radio operator, Junior Sergeant Anna Malyutina, notes in her unit diary, "Hands cracked from cold radio room drafts, despite summer heat outside." She describes maintaining silence protocols during equipment checks, listening for German direction-finding transmissions. For intelligence staffs on both sides, the scale of opposing secrecy indicated mutual anticipation, each awaiting the other's move. 5 July 1943, 0330. Hours. Northern Shoulder, Poniri Sector. Operation Citadel begins with artillery fire recorded in Army Group Center war diaries. German 9th Army under Field Marshal Walter Model commits approximately 500 tanks, including Tiger Tharad heavy tanks from Schwer Panzerabteilung 505. Weather conditions. Clear skies, 18 degrees Celsius at dawn rising to 28 degrees by afternoon, noted in Luftwaffe meteorological logs. Soviet 13th Army under General Nikolai Pukov employs defense in depth, allowing forward positions to absorb initial assault while preserving main strength in secondary belts. Minefield density reaches documented highs. General Model's diary describes Mati's mammoth barriers, slowing advance to 2 kilometers on the first day. Daily German fuel consumption records show 1,800 cubic meters expended across the 9th Army front. Soviet casualty reports from Central Front headquarters estimate 5,000 losses per day in the opening phase, predominantly rifle divisions in forward positions. A corporal named Vasily Semenov, serving with the 307th Rifle Division, records in his diary the smell of gun oil mixing with dust, fingers shaking when reloading his PPSH-41 submachine gun. Diary held in TsAMO archives. A Tiger tank from 1st Company, SP Zabt. 505 strikes a mine near Poniri Station. The crew reports concussion injuries, but the vehicle remains operational after track repair, documented in the battalion's maintenance log. Penetration depth after 3 days, 8 kilometers. For German field officers, the mine losses revealed Soviet calculation favoring attrition over immediate counterstroke. 5th of July 1943, Southern Shoulder, Belgorod-Oboyan Axis. German 4th Panzer Army under Colonel General Hermann Hoth achieves deeper initial penetration than 9th Army in the north. Panzer divisions supported by Panzer Grenadier and assault gun battalions advance 15 kilometers on the first day, breaking through Soviet 1st Defensive Belt. However, Panther Aus D tanks experience catastrophic engine fires. OKH maintenance returns, dated 6th of July, record 50 Panthers disabled on the first day, primarily due to overheating fuel pumps and transmission failures. Soviet Voronezh Front Directive 00451, issued 5th of July and preserved in archives, orders rifle divisions to conduct fighting withdrawal to secondary positions, preserving armoured reserves for counterattack. Soviet 2 Tank Corps launches counterattack near Yakovlevo on 6th of July. After-action reports show 30% tank attrition within 48 hours, predominantly T-34 and T-70 models, against German long-barreled 75mm and 80mm guns. Rail corridor between Kursk and Belgorod becomes saturated with supply trains. Soviet logistical summaries confirm 240 trains per day moving ammunition, fuel, and rations forward. A lieutenant named Sergei Nikitin, T-34 commander with 169th Tank Brigade, describes in his award citation the conditions inside the turret: fuel fumes, sweat pooling in darkness, driver burning his hand on overheated gearbox housing. German Panzer Grenadier Private Josef Riemann writes to his brother about thirst and dust in teeth, letter preserved in Bundesarchiv family collections. For field commands on both sides, vehicle reliability emerged as critical as firepower, operational tempo constrained by breakdowns and fuel supply. 12th of July 1943, Prokhorovka, southwestern Kursk salient. The clash between the 2nd SS Panzer Corps and Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army becomes the largest armoured engagement of the operation. Morning fog, recorded in Soviet operational logs, reduces visibility to 200 meters at 0830 hours. Dust clouds from vehicle movement further degrade sighting conditions after the first hour. Soviet commitment, approximately 800 tanks, predominantly T-34 Model 1942 and T-70 light tanks, organized under 3 tank corps. German forces, approximately 300 armored vehicles including Tiger diaries, Panzer, Ver ASF, H and Stu G3 assault guns from Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, Das Reich and Totenkopf divisions. Soviet 18th Tank Corps records indicate battalion commanders killed in opening minutes as lead elements close to point-blank range to negate German gunnery advantage. German loss logs, reconciled across multiple archival sources, estimate 70 tanks damaged or destroyed over the day. Soviet losses exceed 300 irrecoverable vehicles over subsequent 48 hours as the engagement spreads across 10 kilometers of front. A sergeant named Fyodor Koketkov, loader in a T-34, reports bruised shoulder from shell casing recoil. He is later hospitalized with internal injuries, documented in his medical card archived at TsAMO. A German radio operator notes in his logbook, "Helmet ringing louder than engine noise." Soviet pilot gun camera film from an Il-2 Sturmovik shows burning vehicles clustered near a river bend south of Prokhorovka village. For strategic staffs, the engagement demonstrated that attrition had overtaken maneuver as the determining factor. Neither side achieved breakthrough, and losses mounted without decisive territorial gain. A 13th of July 1943, Orel sector, northern flank. As German Citadel offensive stalls south of Kursk, Soviet Western and Bryansk fronts launch Operation Kutuzov against the Orel salient. The offensive, planned since late June and documented in Stavka Directive 346, commits 11 armies and over 1,200 tanks to reducing the German-held bulge. German 2nd Panzer Army, already weakened by transfer of reserves to support 9th Army's Kursk operations, conducts fighting withdrawal to prepared defensive lines. Soviet artillery expenditure in the first 48 hours exceeds 400,000 shells, recorded in GKO logistics reports and requiring 26 ammunition trains per day to sustain fire rates. German ammunition supply begins rationing on 15th July. Quartermaster logs note short delivery by 18% due to partisan rail interdiction and overextended supply lines. A Soviet nurse, Senior Sergeant Marina Voronina, serving with Central Front Field Hospital, notes in written testimony the shortage of iodine and linen, forcing bandages to be washed in river water and reused. German Captain Wolfgang Bäumer, Panzer Regiment staff officer, mentions in his diary entry dated 14th of July the silence after motor stops and ringing in skull, a reference to abandoning a disabled Panzer IV near Mtsensk after track damage from mine strike. Luftwaffe sortie rates decline as airfields fall under Soviet artillery range. Mission logs show daily sorties dropping from 1,200 on 5th of July to 600 by 17th July. For headquarters staffs, the moment marked transition from German offensive initiative to Soviet operational control. The balance of action had shifted. 18th of July 1943, Belgorod-Lin, southern Kursk sector. Soviet forces maintain pressure against German 4th Panzer Army positions as Operation Citadel is formally abandoned. Weather humid. Temperatures reaching 32 degrees Celsius by midday. Ground churned to fine dust by continuous vehicle movement. Engineer reports confirm tractors and recovery vehicles clogged with particulate matter. Soviet steppe front, held in reserve throughout the initial German offensive, joins the counter-offensive. Air support intensifies with documented 5,000 plus sorties by Soviet aviation in the last 2 weeks of July, per VVS operational summaries. German Army Group South strength reports, compiled 25 July and archived in OKH records, show 25% manpower reduction since 4th of July. Casualties, mechanical breakdowns, and fuel shortages degrading combat effectiveness. A Soviet rifleman, Private Alexei Kravchenko of the 89th Guards Rifle Division, writes in a letter home about soldiers counting spoons and cartridges preserved in regional archive family donations. German mechanic Unteroffizier Otto Brandner, assigned to Panzer Repair Workshop near Kharkov, records in his diary the work of welding damaged Panthers at night, sparks illuminating canvas shelters in summer heat, blistered hands from torch work. Belgorod falls to Soviet forces on 5th August. The city's recapture, along with Orel's liberation on the same day, prompts Moscow to fire the first wartime victory salute. 120-gun artillery salvo, documented in official communiques. For operational analysts on both sides, material exhaustion had emerged as the dominant constraint. Vehicle losses, outpaced replacement, fuel stocks dwindled, and ammunition expenditure exceeded pre-war projections by factors recorded in supply ledgers. 1st August 1943, Kharkov sector, Ukraine. Soviet forces launch Operation Rumyantsev, the offensive aimed at liberating Kharkov and pushing German forces beyond the Dnieper River. Voronezh and Steppe fronts commit 980,000 personnel, 2,400 tanks, and 13,000 artillery pieces, figures documented in Soviet General Staff summaries. German Army Group South, weakened by Kursk losses and redeployment pressures, holds defensive positions with approximately 300,000 troops and fewer than 600 operational tanks, per intelligence estimates. The offensive achieves penetration rates exceeding 12 kilometers per day in initial phase, overwhelming German defences thinned by attrition and fuel shortages. Soviet tank losses for June through August total approximately 6,000 vehicles, recorded across front-level loss reports, yet monthly production maintains replacement flow. Factory logs from Nizhny Tagil, Chelyabinsk, and Gorky plants confirm output of 1,500 T-34 tanks per month during this period. German tank losses from July through August reach 1,612 vehicles per field strength returns. Production in the same period totals approximately 300 Panthers and 250 Tigers, documented in Speer Ministry production tables. The disparity reveals industrial capacity as battlefield determinant. A factory worker named Elena Krylova, employed at the Ural tank plant number 183, writes to her brother serving at the front about conditions. Metal filings in hair, machines loud as thunder, 12-hour shifts without rest. Her letter, part of an archival oral history collection, describes women and teenagers operating lathes and welding turrets in unheated workshops during winter months. A German family in Bavaria receives notice that their son, reported missing near Orel in mid-July, is now confirmed killed, one entry in casualty rolls that would grow throughout the year. 23rd of August 1943. Kharkov, Ukraine. Soviet forces recapture the city after intense urban fighting documented in after-action reports from both sides. German defenders, encircled and low on ammunition, conduct withdrawal under Soviet artillery fire. Combat engineer logs record demolition of rail yards, bridges, and industrial facilities by retreating German forces. Standard scorched earth protocols per OKH directives. Soviet casualties in the Kharkov operation exceed 70,000, recorded in step-front medical summaries. German losses, including prisoners, approach 20,000 per archival reconciliation. The city's civilian population, reduced from pre-war 900,000 to fewer than 200,000 through evacuation, occupation, and violence, emerges from basements and shelters as Soviet forces secure districts. NKVD reports document evidence of mass executions at Drobitsky Yar Ravine, estimated 15,000 victims, predominantly Jewish civilians, killed during German occupation. A Soviet military chaplain's diary, preserved in regional archives, describes conducting field services among rubble and unexploded ordnance, soldiers kneeling in factory ruins. German rearguard units retreat westward under air attack. Luftwaffe fighter cover diminishes as forward airfields fall to Soviet advance. A FW Wonder 90 pilot, Oberleutnant Heinrich Sturm of JG-51, records in his logbook the fatigue of flying 3 sorties per day, with inadequate maintenance support and fuel rationing, reducing training time to near zero for replacement pilots. For strategic planners in Berlin and Moscow, the recapture of Kharkov confirmed the irreversible shift. German forces now conducted defensive operations across the entire Eastern Front, and Soviet industrial output sustained offensive momentum despite staggering losses. September 1943, Dnieper River Line, Eastern Ukraine. German OKH Directive 5143, issued 30 August and archived in military records, orders withdrawal to fortified positions along the Dnieper River, a defensive line spanning over 700 kilometers from Smolensk to the Black Sea. Engineers prepare demolitions on bridges and ferries, rear area units evacuate equipment and supplies westward under Soviet air interdiction. Rail transport logs show German withdrawal, consuming 1D200 trains in September alone, moving personnel, vehicles, and materiel under constant partisan attack. Soviet forces pursue, reaching the Dnieper's eastern bank by late September and establishing bridgeheads, despite German defensive fire. Crossing operations, documented in front-level reports, involve makeshift rafts, pontoon bridges under artillery bombardment, and night infiltrations by reconnaissance units. A Soviet combat engineer, Sergeant Dmitry Volkov of the 3rd Pontoon Brigade, describes in post-war testimony the work of assembling bridges while under mortar fire. Hands numb in cold water, bolts slipping from frozen fingers. His unit suffers 40% casualties during one crossing operation near Kremenchug, recorded in casualty rolls. German defensive positions, fortified throughout September, employ concrete bunkers, wire obstacles, and pre-registered artillery zones, yet lack sufficient manpower and heavy weapons to hold continuous line. A German infantry officer, Lieutenant Erich Vogel of the 76th Infantry Division, notes in his diary the absence of replacements. Companies reduced to 50 men, ammunition rationed to 10 rounds per rifle. Soviet aviation maintains air superiority. VVS logs confirm 10,000 sorties in September, supporting river crossing operations. For field commanders, the Dnieper represented the final natural barrier before Ukraine's western districts. Its breach would expose German positions across the southern front. October 1943. Western Ukraine and eastern Belarus. Soviet forces consolidate bridgeheads across the Dnieper and prepare for autumn offensives aimed at liberating left bank Ukraine and pushing toward pre-war Polish borders. Rasputitsa, autumn mud season, begins in early October, reducing vehicle mobility and delaying offensive operations. Road conditions documented in transport logs show supply trucks requiring winch extraction and horse-drawn carts supplementing motorized transport. Despite weather constraints, Soviet forces liberate Dnipropetrovsk on 25 October and advance toward Kyiv. German defensive efforts focus on counterattacks to eliminate bridgeheads. Localized successes near Bukrin failed to reverse Soviet momentum due to insufficient reserves and fuel shortages. A tank crewman, Guard Sergeant Ivan Karpov of the 5th Guards Tank Army, describes in his memoir waiting 3 days for fuel resupply during October operations, tanks concealed in tree lines, crews sleeping inside vehicles to avoid hypothermia. German logistics reports from Army Group South note fuel allocation reduced to 60% of operational requirement. Vehicles immobilized for lack of diesel. Horses requisitioned from local populations to move artillery. Soviet production figures for 1943, compiled in GKO industrial summaries, show 24,000 tanks and self-propelled guns manufactured, a rate exceeding total German tank production for the entire war by mid-1944. The disparity, evident in replacement rates, ensures Soviet forces maintain offensive capability despite heavy losses. A German General Staff assessment, dated November 1943, preserved in Bundesarchiv, acknowledges enemy replacement capacity exceeds our attrition capability. For planners in Moscow, industrial endurance had become the decisive factor. Battlefield losses, though severe, could be sustained. German losses could not. 6 November 1943. Kyiv, Ukraine. Soviet forces liberate the Ukrainian capital after 4 days of urban combat. German defenders withdraw westward, demolishing bridges and infrastructure per evacuation protocols. Soviet casualties in the Kyiv operation exceed 30,000. German losses, including prisoners, approach 12,000 Huns per combined archival records. The city's population reduced through evacuation, deportations, and occupation violence emerges from cellars and shelters. NKVD reports document massacre sites at Babi Yar, where an estimated 33,000 Jewish civilians were killed in September 1941, with additional victims throughout the occupation. A Soviet soldier, Private Anatoly Kuznetsov, age 19, who will later become a writer, records his impressions of entering the ruined city: empty streets, damaged buildings, silence broken by occasional gunfire from remaining pockets of resistance. His notebook, donated to Kyiv archives decades later, captures the moment without embellishment. German forces retreat to the Korostan fortified region, establishing defensive positions for winter. Luftwaffe air support declines further. Mission logs show sortie rates reduced to 300 per day across the entire Eastern Front by late November, compared to 2,000 per day in July. Soviet aviation achieves near total air superiority. VVS operational strength reaches 13,000 aircraft by year's end, documented in Air Force command summaries. For populations across the Eastern Front, the liberation of Kyiv marked a turning point in perception. The possibility of German defeat, previously uncertain, now appeared inevitable. The psychological shift, recorded in letters, diaries, and post-war testimonies, accompanied the material reality. German forces could no longer hold territory against sustained Soviet pressure backed by industrial production and manpower reserves that exceeded Axis capacity. As 1943 ended, operational records from both sides confirmed the strategic transformation. German forces had transitioned entirely to defensive operations. Soviet forces maintained offensive initiative across a front spanning 2,400 kilometers. Casualty figures, compiled in medical and personnel summaries, revealed the human cost. Soviet losses for 1943 exceeded 7 million military personnel killed, wounded, missing, or captured. German losses approached 2 million on the Eastern Front alone, yet replacement rates diverged. Soviet military strength stood at 6.4 million by January 1944, sustained by mobilization and industrial output. German strength declined despite mobilization efforts, constrained by multi-front commitments and shrinking resource base. Factory production ledgers told the complementary story. Soviet tank production for 1943 totaled 24,000 vehicles. German production reached 10,700 tanks and assault guns. Aircraft production: Soviet factories delivered 35,000 aircraft. German plants produced 25,000. Artillery pieces, trucks, ammunition, every category showed Soviet quantitative superiority derived from industrial capacity mobilized across the Urals and Siberia. For the participants, the numbers represented lived experience. A Soviet factory worker who had spent the year operating a lathe in an unheated Ural plant. A German soldier who had retreated 500 kilometers from Kursk to the Dnieper, watching supply columns dwindle. A civilian emerging from occupation into liberation's uncertain aftermath. The archival files hold their testimony: maintenance logs, casualty rolls, production tables, letters home. They document adaptation under pressure, endurance beyond estimate, and the grinding reality of industrial war. The ledger's final line for 1943 recorded a balance shifted irreversibly, not through individual battles alone, but through the cumulative weight of production, logistics, and organized human effort. The record closes without commentary. The war continued. The outcome had been determined.